Okay, I'm going to talk to you about the bureaucracy. And that's the definition right there. The non-elected people, institutions, and agencies who run the government on a day-to-day basis. So it's people you know who are government employees, but they're not in Congress, they're not presidents, they're not judges. They're just sort of average people who work for the IRS or NASA, or maybe they work at the DMV, or maybe they're an attorney for the Justice Department. So sort of everyday people who work for the government and make it happen every day. We're going to divide the bureaucracy into four parts: cabinet departments, regulatory agencies, government corporations, and independent executive agencies. So let's go through those one at a time. Okay, the cabinet departments we've talked about before: Department of Defense, Education, Agriculture, departments like that. And as we talked about before, they're each headed by a secretary. The head of the Department of Defense is called Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, etc. The only exception is the head of the Justice Department is called the Attorney General. Those secretaries are nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. As I'm making this video, Biden has nominated a number of people for his cabinet. Some have been confirmed by the Senate. Some have had a hearing already where they had to answer questions before the Senate, and now they're waiting for a vote. So it's all in process, but they have to be confirmed by the Senate before they get the job. On the other hand, the president can fire them at any time for any reason. President Trump fired a lot of his cabinet members over the course of 4 years. He didn't need a reason. If he just woke up one day and decided, I don't like your tie, he could fire whoever he wanted to. And most of the departments are pretty explanatory by the name: agriculture, education. But Department of State deals with foreign affairs. They're the diplomatic people. And then justice, as we talked about, are the prosecutors. They're the ones, if you break a federal law, they're going to try to put you in jail. And they're headed by the Attorney General. So the cabinet is the 15 department heads and then some other top advisors like the vice president. We've looked at Biden's cabinet nominees already. Some confirmed, some not. If he gets all of his people, it's going to be the most gender and racially diverse cabinet we've ever had. And so each of those people advise the president, but they also run their own department. So there could be a conflict sometimes. The president needs to know what's best for the country, but you also want to do what's best for your department and the people who work for you. So maybe a little bit of a conflict there. Okay, regulatory agencies are something very different. They make and enforce rules for a particular industry. So for example, the FDA, the Food and Drug Agency, they make rules for food and drug makers all over the country. The FAA makes rules for the airlines that the airlines have to follow. The FEC, the Federal Election Commission, makes rules for elections and campaigns. The FCC, they make rules for TV and radio. So Congress will pass sort of a broad law, like food has to be safe, and then the agency, like the FDA, steps in and then makes the very specific rules. This food is safe, but this one is not. This vaccine has been approved, but this one is not. So the agency kind of does the very specific detail work. Congress passes the big law, the agency does the details. And they do that for two reasons. First of all, Congress doesn't have the time to get into all of that detail. They've got other things to do. But also the people who work for the agencies are experts in a way that Congress is not. The people who work for the FDA are going to understand what's a safe vaccine and what isn't, and what kind of trials you have to go through. Most Congress people are not experts at that level of detail, so they let the experts do the detail-specific work. So for example, Congress will pass a law that says no bad words on network TV. The FCC then comes in and says, okay, well, here's the words you can say, but here's the words you can't say. And so the agencies make the rules, and then they decide if you broke the rules, and then they punish you for breaking the rules. So they have a lot of jobs to do. How they pass a rule. If the FCC wants to pass a rule saying you can't say this particular word on TV, they tell the public, hey, we're thinking about making a rule about bad words. And the public makes suggestions. You should be able to say this, but not that. And then based on those suggestions, the FCC makes a proposed rule. And then the public can comment on that. And then they issue a final rule. And so people who work at these agencies like the FCC, they're not elected. And so it's kind of a check for the public on them. Before they make a rule, they've got to basically get suggestions from the public twice. Once when they said they're going to make a rule, and then once on the specific proposed rule that they came up with. So the public gets some input, some say in the process. They're led by a 5 to 10 person commission or board. The commissioners on that board serve for a fixed term, and it's not always consistent with the president's term. So Biden has some commissioners who were appointed by Trump. Trump had some that were commissioners appointed by Obama. They're nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, but unlike the cabinet department heads, they can only be fired for cause, for a good reason. They didn't do something right on the job. So Biden can't just fire Trump's people because he doesn't like them or because he doesn't like, the tie that they wore. There has to be a for cause reason. So because of that, the president has a lot more control over the cabinet departments than he does over these agencies. Okay, government corporations, they're like companies, they just happen to be run by the government. They provide a service for a fee. The post office will mail your letter, but you have to buy a stamp. Amtrak will take you on the train, but you've got to buy a ticket. So it's like a company, but it's run by the government. And then independent executive agencies, basically everything else that doesn't fit into one of the first three. So for example, NASA, the space agency. Okay, how bureaucrats get their job. I used to work for the Department of Health and Human Services as a lawyer, pretty low-level bureaucrat. Before the 1880s, the way most government officials got their job was through patronage or political favors, or sometimes you hear it called the spoils system. So a president would fire all the government employees, hire all of his friends to do the job, and then the next president would come in, fire all those people, bring in his friends. And then in the 1880s, we decided that's not really a good way to do things. The people who work for the government should actually be, qualified for the job. They shouldn't get the job because of somebody they knew. They should get the job because they're the best person. So Congress passed a law called the Pendleton Civil Service Act. Most federal bureaucrats must be hired based on merit, not through patronage. So when I got hired by Health and Human Services, I sent in a resume. They called me in for an interview, kind of a normal job process. That's how it's usually done. The only exception is the very top people like cabinet secretaries. They get appointed by the president, and it could be through patronage or something like that. But for most of the millions of federal bureaucrats out there, you get hired through a normal process just like you would for any other job. And that's because of the Pendleton Civil Service Act. In 1939, we passed a law called the Hatch Act. A government can't fire a bureaucrat for political reasons. So you can't be fired because you're a Democrat or because you're a Republican. Your job is protected from the next president. If the president comes in as a different party or something, your job is protected. You can't be fired as a federal government worker because of your political beliefs. On the other hand, the trade-off for that is that federal government workers, bureaucrats, can't engage in political activity at work. So if you're going to talk politics or do politics, it has to be in your off hours. So I used to work with a guy at Health and Human Services. This was back in 2000 when Bush and Gore were running against each other for president. And he had all these Al Gore, Vote Gore, Democratic Party buttons that he would wear on his coat to work. But as soon as he got to the door of the building, he had to take off all the buttons, put them in his pocket, walk in, do his job. And then as soon as he walked out of the building, he would put all the buttons back on and go home. And that's because of the Hatch Act. Now, a lot of people have accused President Trump and a lot of his people for violating the Hatch Act, for doing a lot of political things on their own time or on the job rather than on their own time. And I've got a little link there if you want to look at it. But he was accused of a lot of Hatch Act violations, he and his people. Okay, congressional checks on the bureaucracy. Things that Congress can do to control them. First of all, the top people have to be confirmed by the Senate. Second, Congress has the power of the purse, and so they control what the agency's budget is. So if they think the Department of State's doing a good job and important work, they can give them more money to work with. On the other hand, if they think the Department of Agriculture is doing a bad job, or maybe they just don't think they need that much money, they can cut that agency's budget because Congress has the power of the purse. Next, they can hold hearings and do what they call oversight. And so if there's a problem with an agency, the Congress can get the agency head to come in, answer some questions, explain what's going on so that Congress knows what the problem is and how to fix it and what to do about it. And then sometimes they bring the agency heads in just once a year or so just to say, hey, how are things going? what can we do to make your job easier? So that's a hearing that Congress has with agencies and agency heads and agency employees. And then lastly, Congress is the boss. So if an agency makes a decision, Congress can always overturn it. If the FDA said we're going to approve the Pfizer vaccine, Congress could pass a law that says no, we're not. Pfizer's illegal. It's illegal to give it or take it. Congress usually won't because the agency people are the experts. But in theory, Congress can overturn basically anything an agency like that does. Presidential checks. The president appoints or nominates the top level people. Congress has the power of the purse, but he can certainly propose or suggest to Congress that they increase or decrease a particular agency's budget. And then, as we've talked about before, the president can issue executive orders to the agencies. Do this but not that. Deport these people but not those people. To all the different kinds of executive orders that we've talked about already, those are orders from the boss to the agency saying, I want you to do this and to do it this way. And then lastly, judicial checks. The one check the courts have on everybody is judicial review. If an agency does something that's unconstitutional, the court can strike it down. If the FCC came out with a rule that says it's illegal to criticize President Trump on TV or President Biden on TV, that would be a free speech First Amendment problem. The courts would look at it, strike it down, and that rule would no longer be valid.